All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for coming back. Today, we have Carmen Di Luccio, who's a professional astrologer. He's been passionately studying astrology for over 14 years. His work helps guide others in navigating their life to its potential. And he does public speaking on astrology and other topics. He's based near Toronto, Canada, and he offers his services online internationally. He and I actually met on a trip where I was going to do a talk in Toronto, and a mutual friend introduced us, and we hung out for the day. And then, surprisingly, we reunited in, it was at the Maya temples in Chichen Itza on December 21st, 2012. And it was there that I learned of his passion for superfoods, which really helped me at a time that I was dealing with a lot of health issues. He's into tonic herbalism, crystals, and many other spiritual modalities. Today, I want to talk about what astrology is, how it can help us navigate our individual lives, and also help to understand global affairs. So let's just invite him warmly onto the Ben Stewart Podcast.
Thank you, Ben. Yeah, we've known each other for about a decade ago. We met. I think it was.
You're good, brother.
Hey, Gordon. The screen's black. I don't see anybody.
You're good now. You're good. It's just the intro,
okay.
So we're good.
Okay.
We're in the universe right now, and now we're back.
We go. Cool.
So, yeah, man, we've known each other for a while. What year was that? Do you remember when we met? It had to have been like 2010, 2011.
It was either 2011 or 2012, because 2010 I wasn't in Toronto.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it must have been 2011.
Yeah.
That was actually the same trip that I met. Obviously, Idane was the one who connected us. And I met Nico Spartist, very awesome friend, and also Michael Petrakis, who I ended up doing an episode with, and still connected with all you guys. That was a very potent and powerful trip of mine. But how wild was that we ended up meeting at Chichen Itza just randomly, kind of like standing in the food line together next to one another?
Standing in the food line. And then I remember that might have been a couple of days before, maybe the 20th or the 19th. And then I remember on the 21st, in front of the pyramid, I bumped into, and we were having an interesting time. I'll put it like that.
Yeah, we were both going through some stuff for sure. And so I don't want to derail too much, but that was actually when I noticed you packed all your own food. You were eating raw at the time, and I had just gone through. I won't go into super detail, but I met my wife just 2 months prior. It was the end of October. And my whole life changed at that point. I got super sick. And that was when I went on my first raw food diet, and I lost a ridiculous amount of weight. I've never been big either, but I think I lost 20 pounds. And I looked really emaciated, but I had also just gotten really sick. And I knew that there was a reason I needed to allow for the sickness, that crisis, to be a healing crisis rather than just a fight against it. So I knew that this has to be my reset. I got to go deeper into my own health. And I'd love to know what, before we get into astrology, what drove you deeper into superfoods and raw foods?
Okay. So right now, just for the record, right now I'm not on a raw food diet, but I do periods of it, right? So probably in the spring, summer, I'll do raw, plant-based mostly. But at that time, I got into it back in 2006, 2007 was when I first started learning. 2006, I started learning about it. And that's when I was going through, I guess you can call it a spiritual awakening. And I started learning more about it from a spiritual perspective. I was vegan at the time, or plant-based. I didn't really necessarily go down that route for a lot of the common vegan reasons. I did it more to help activate me spiritually, because I was reading a lot of literature and exposed to a lot of information where they were saying that when you eat raw food, especially plant-based food, it helps to connect you with your soul more, and you start to glow more, and you start to become more. It could stimulate your intuition. It can help you to kind of just feel more activated and to feel more aligned, right? And so that was what kind of drove me. And that was more so I started with the, raw food, and then superfoods. I got more into superfoods because I started learning that, you know, if you eat like lettuce and oranges and like regular produce, it doesn't have, those foods are domesticated. They're very hybrid, right? They're not, you don't find foods like that in the wild, right? So I got into more superfoods, wild crafting herbs and things like that, because based on my own experience and based on the research that I've done, those foods have more, they're like, the thing is hybrid food is further disconnected from nature, and superfoods and wild foods, especially things like, I'm really big on algae, mushrooms, things like that, shilajit. Those foods have, first of all, they're very nutrient dense. They're very highly mineralized. And they're just less disconnected from nature, right? They're like, I used to always say that algae or blue-green algae or cyanobacteria is one of the first life forms on the planet. And when you consume a food like that, it helps to sort of, I used to say, you know, if you want to be closer to God, you should eat food earlier in the food chain. So that was my thinking in those days, right? So, yeah.
I dig that. You know, like when you mention that, it's funny that the cyanobacteria, like throughout all these extinctions that we've had on the planet, they've lived through all of that, and everything is laid out in harmonics, and there's some ancestral constant. There's some vibratory frequency from that cyanobacteria that must be able to like tap you into something a bit more primal and beyond our limited scope of understanding, like what's happening in our lives, like, you know, what kind of intelligence can we connect with? And the body knows, regardless of whether the mind wants to know or not, the body knows. And I'm curious, like, did you get into astrology first? Because what I want to ask is, were you looking at like under like a certain kind of lunar cycle, or like when you harvest certain things more? Because I know that I've heard a lot about, especially with Steiner's biodynamic farming, a lot of it has to do with lunar cycles and inoculating the soil. Curious if astrology leaked into any of the way that you would at least choose, or maybe even, you know, wild harvest some of the herbs that you had.
A little bit. Like I use, I think it sounds like it's two questions. So I mean, I do use astrology now because like I know a lot more now than I did, you know, but so I got into astrology around the same time I got into like superfoods and raw food. It was all happening. It was all like a package deal for me. But over time, as I learn more about astrology, I do sometimes use it for wild crafting, or I make my own tincture. So I always start the tincture based on the astrology. I'm not like a hardcore wild crafter. It's more like a hobby. It's not like, you know, I used to teach people about that kind of stuff, but now I'm more focused on astrology, but I still participate in a little bit of wild crafting and elixir crafting and stuff like that. But in 2000, what happened was in 2006, so in the years prior to 2006, I started kind of learning more about conspiracies, and I started opening my mind a lot. I started even following a lot of Dr. McCullough's work and things like that. And then, and I was actually into numerology at that time. I used to listen to Coast to Coast. I know you were on George Norrie before. I used to listen to that show all the time. That was, you know, I used to work a job. I used to night shift. I used to just listen to Coast all the time. And what happened was, like one thing after another, from like 2002, 2003 to 2006. And in 2006, I was at a trade show. So this is actually a good story tied into the algae. I was at a trade show with one of my friends. And it was like a bodybuilder, like muscle expo, like all these, you know, muscle heads walking around, creatine and all this, you know, protein powders and stuff like that. And then there was a booth. I went with one of my friends because he's into like UFC, and there's some UFC fighters there. And so there was this booth, E3 Live. That's one company that makes the blue-green algae. And we felt something, it was like something was pushing us to go to that booth. And I was with my friend who's a Pisces, so he's like very like, you know, flow, and I was just kind of going on his flow. And so they're giving away shots of this algae, the cyanobacteria E3 Live. And there's something, it was like I had this, it was almost like a deja vu moment, but it was something inside me telling me, like, you need to try this, you need to have this right now. I never felt anything like that before. It's like some spiritual forces or intuition or guides or whatever you want to call it overcame my consciousness and said, you have to have this. And I drank it, and within minutes I felt this like levity, like my energy was like levitating. It was weird, and I felt this sort of feeling in my brain, or I don't know what it was, that I've never felt before. And I felt this clarity I've never felt before. And then from that point on, I started, guzzling that stuff. And I was very toxic at the time. I see really bad at the time. And then through that experience, that's what led me to astrology, because I started hanging around different people. I started hanging around more of like the conscious community in Toronto. And then I met someone one time that was studying astrology at the time. And then he asked me, he's like, what do you know? I was always like interested because I'm a Taurus sun and I always resonated with Taurus. But he asked me, he goes, what time were you born? What time and location? And when he asked me the exact time, I was like, wow, that must be very specific. And then he pulled up my chart. We talked about it a little bit. He was just like an amateur. But literally, like at that moment, I became obsessed with it. And I came home, I started like just Googling the shit out of it. And that's how my journey started. So they kind of came together. For me, the raw food, superfood diet was a big spiritual catalyst, like breath work might be for some people, or yoga might be for some people, or other modalities, right? So there's a lot of people that do the raw food, superfood thing, and it doesn't activate them at the same level it activated me, but there might be another modality that works for them. And I think part of the reason is that I have a lot of Taurus. I'm a sun in Taurus, moon in Taurus, which is Earth, and Earth and Taurus is associated with food. So I feel that for me, like food and diet is a catalyst in that way. But I do, healthy diet is good for everybody, obviously. But as far as like the spiritual activation that I experienced from doing that, that's what I think it's because I have a lot of Earth and a lot of Taurus. So.
It is interesting that, so the diet part, definitely it enters the body. It's very much so bodily. It affects and influences the mind for sure. But then we're talking astrology, which is something that you engage with much more with the mind. And these two things happen to you, and they're both quite ancient. I mean, astrology is the original science. And if you look at any of the megalithic structures around the globe, all of them have to do with observations of the heavens. So I would love to know from your perspective, is there just one science of astrology? What's your view on this? Because I've heard of Vedic astrology, and I've heard of different branches of it. But like, to you, what is astrology? And with that, like, how do you use it as something more than just a cookie cutter recipe for figuring stuff out? And how do you use it intuitively?
Okay, so I guess I'll start with, there is different systems of astrology. In the West, the more common system, and there's like subsystems, depends how you look at it, is Western astrology. And Western astrology, a lot of it actually originated from the Hellenistic period about 2,000 years ago from Greece, but its origins go way further back, right? But a lot of the astrology that we practice today in the West was developed 2,000 years ago, but it evolved from previous astrologies. Now, what another really popular approach to astrology is what people refer to as Vedic, which I don't really call it Vedic. I call it Jyotish. If you go to India, no one really calls it Vedic. That's like Westerners call it Vedic because they want to make it sound superior to Western astrology. So what happened was in the 1980s, these Westerners used to refer to it as Hindu astrology. And then there was some group, they started calling it Vedic because like there are parts of Indian astrology that are Vedic, but the majority of it, from my understanding, was influenced by the Greeks. When Alexander the Great went to India, they brought the Greek astrology, and then the Indians combined their limited, like they were only using astrology to do like mantras, like when there's a certain moon phase and a certain, they have a system called nakshatras. It's like 27 signs. It's like signs. So they would do, okay, when it's a full moon in this nakshatra, you do this mantra kind of thing. That's what they were doing with it. And then when the Greeks introduced astrology to them, the Greek astrology. This is based on stuff I've heard. I wasn't there. Obviously, I don't have a time machine, but they took that astrology and they combined it with what they were already doing with astrology. And then now you have they refer to it as Jyotish. When you go to India, they're called Vedic, Indian astrologers, they're called Jyotishis. I've been to India. So no one really, sometimes they call it Vedic because they're influenced by the West calling it Vedic, but most of it's not Vedic actually. So now what is astrology? Astrology could be used for everything. Astrology, one of the debates in the astrology world, that is in the astrology community, that is still being debated is astrology causal or is it a reflection? And I think majority of astrologers nowadays will say that it's a reflection, right? Like what's happening on Earth is a reflection of what's going on in the sky. However, there was, just on a little side note, I came across a paper years ago. There's a group in Zurich. They're like a geophysics group, ETH Zurich. You ever heard of ETH Zurich? They study geophysics.
No.
So they did a study where they found, and they're not into astrology or anything like that, but they did a study, and I have it saved. I can send it to you if you want. They did a study where they found that the positioning of planets could affect how the sun affects us, right? So a lot of scientists, they always discredit astrology, and they're trying to, like, they use scientific methods where they're trying to see, like, well, how could this planet affect what's happening on Earth? But what this group found was that the positioning of planets affects how the sun affects us, right? And you can't dispute the sun. The sun affects everything, right? So anyways, that's on a little side note. However, there's astrological techniques that we use when we're doing forecasting work that have, especially when you're doing like personal astrology, that have nothing to do with the current position of planets. So it's a reflection. It's kind of like when you pull tarot cards at a certain time in your life, it's a reflection of what's going on in your life. Or they do those like teacup readings or whatever. It's kind of like that, but it's more advanced. It's more of a science. There's so many technical components to it. Like it's never ending. There's thousands of asteroids. You can look at all these, you can look at all those asteroids if you want, you know what I mean? You'll get overwhelmed. It's kind of not practical, but it's never ending. So astrology, it's most people are familiar with doing natal astrology. Like when you look at someone's astrology chart, you look at their astrological blueprint, you look at their forecast. That's the most common application. But like you said before, you're talking about how using it for wildcrafting. You can use it for that. Like if you want to harvest a herb that's ruled by Jupiter, then maybe you might want to go looking for it or pick it when it's the Jupiter energy is kind of highlighted in a way. Or you can use it to plant when you plant certain crops, or you can use it to when you meet someone for the first time, whatever the astrology was at that moment is imprinted into your relationship with that person. You can use astrology to launch a business. You can use astrology to launch just anything. You can use it to understand relationships better. It's like never ending. And when you get when you're kind of obsessive like me, you have astrology app on your phone, because they never used to have astrology. They never used to have smartphones. It used to take like hours to cast a chart. Now I pull it up instantly. I'm looking at charts all day long, and sometimes it can be you can get a little carried away with it.
That is interesting to think about, dude, that we're also at a different time in history in that respect. I'd never thought of that like the old astrologers, they couldn't just whip out an app to help them understand it on the fly like we do with many things with our smartphones. Yeah. We're definitely in a different time when it comes to being able to apply astrology to more of a spectrum of our lives. And it's really, I guess that's where the intuition lies, is whatever you can imagine, whatever life throws at you, I'm sure with the right intuitive introspection, you can find a way to apply astrology to it. And you just mentioned a bunch of different ways. I remember when I had just gotten hired by Gaia, and I hit you up and I was like, dude, I want this to work. Can you tell me exactly what time and day around this time period I should enter those doors? Yeah. And you did. And we found the exact, I think it was like a 4 or 5 minute window. Maybe it might have even been like a 2 or 3 minute window. Yeah. And I did it. And
Mr.
what was cool about Gaia Gaia didn't bat an eye at it. I was like, hey, I like, what time do you think you'll show up today? It's your orientation day. I was like, I'll be there around 10:43 a.m. on Wednesday. And they're like, that's specific, but okay. And I told them, I was like, well, you know, it's got an astrological root. And they were like, oh, cool. And they were just cool with that. But I guess to roll this into a question, what are some of the more profound ways that people have come to you asking like, hey, I need help with this, that had you step outside of your comfort zone, being like, okay, I've never done that before, but I know the premise of how to apply astrology to new things. Well, you know, what are some of those territories that you've had to venture because you internationally are helping people? I was in Holland at the time that you were helping me, you know, when my daughter was born, and you did a chart on her. So I'd love to know how taking on clients has brought you to other people, or into other like territories of how to apply astrology.
Sure. I think the most recent is like about a year ago. So you can even use locational astrology. You can see, I should have mentioned that before. This is a really cool thing you can do. You can see like how different parts of the world affect you, like what the energies are for you in that location. And then there's static energies, and then there's energies that change. So about a year ago, I've done it. I've been doing it for years. I usually do it for one person, or sometimes I'll do it for a couple, but I had someone that wanted me to look for the whole family, which is like, even if you do one person, it's overwhelming. You're looking at a lot of information. It's could be doing that kind of astrology for me could be a little mentally exhausting. And so to look for, I think 4 or 5 people, I can't remember if they have 2 kids or 3 kids. I think it was 2 kids, to look at for all of them. And then I use my creativity to look at like for each individual person, but also I did like a composite for the family. And I can't remember exactly what I did. I wrote it down, what I did, but I just felt kind of intuitively guided to, okay, this is how you should approach this. And it actually, it worked out because there's other things that I saw that clarified what I was seeing with other techniques. So that's the most recent thing I could think of. I mean, I've dabbled in things, and some of them were useful. Some of the things I've did in the past weren't too useful. That's the most recent. I mean, you know, the main things I do right now is natal astrology, locational astrology, relationship astrology, children's astrology, and launches, like when people want to launch something. Or I try not to do weddings. I'm not really big on doing weddings and stuff like that, but that's mainly what I do. But I would say, like, when people give me like to look at something that I already offer, and then they, you know, it might involve multiple people or multiple, like so many different dynamics, and that's where it gets tricky. So I think that's the main one that comes to mind.
Well, I'm curious too. You wrote this recent article we were talking about before the show about Pluto in Capricorn, and how this has also been affecting a lot of some of the macro major things. Because do you tend to find, I mean, first kind of 2 questions. Is there an approach that you take that's different when it comes to natal and very like micro specific to a person versus the macro bigger things? And 2, what have you sort of seen in these major years, and especially right now where it seems like, you know, we'll take any explanation to kind of explain the volatility, because it seems like everything is just hijacked.
Yeah. So when you're looking at a natal chart, you're looking at somebody's astrological blueprint. Were you asking about Pluto Return or Pluto in Capricorn?
Well, the article is Pluto and Capricorn.
Okay.
So wherever we want to riff it.
So because it's a little bit of a different answer. So when you're looking at a chart, when you're doing a reading for somebody or a country or a business or something like that, you're looking at how the planets in the sky are interacting with the astrological blueprint of that person or thing. When you're looking at just the general astrology and how it's affecting the world, you can look at country charts, but mainly you're just looking at the planets, like what they're doing, where they're going, and that's called mundane astrology. You're not really basing it on someone's actual chart or a country's chart or anything like that. So the thing is with Pluto and Capricorn, that's just a general thing that's happening. But then the United States, when you look at the chart of the U.S. From 1776, it syncs up with their Pluto return. So Yeah.
And is that how that ties into this article? So kind of walk us through what you found in this article.
Okay, so the article you're talking about, I wrote it back in 2017. But I actually wrote I used to have another website called Truth Pages, and I actually wrote an article when I first started studying astrology before I met Ben. I did other content years ago. It's not online anymore. So Pluto represents transformation. Pluto also has to do with purging, destruction, rebirth. Pluto rules power structures, but power, control. It's deep. It's raw. It's real. It can be intense. It's associated with Scorpio. And whenever Pluto goes through a sign, usually, like on average, it might be in a sign around 15 years. It's always depends on the sign, because Pluto has kind of like a weird orbit, so it's not consistent. So Pluto entered Capricorn. Capricorn represents government structures, represents government. It rules banking. Ben's a Capricorn sun.
That's right.
Capricorn rules business. Like when you look at mundane astrology, like the world at large, Capricorn rules. The main three things is government, banking, business.
Gotcha.
It could represent other things too, and just generally structures in society, but more to do with Capricorn is associated with management, right? So a government manages a country, right? Capricorn has to do with, any kind of business, and then finance, banks falls into the domain of Capricorn, because Capricorn's an earth sign, so earth does rule like money, material things, but Capricorn is ruled by Saturn, so Capricorn is more like the structure of the earthly realm, right? And so Pluto and Capricorn, it began in like 2008, 2009, something like that, and it'll be there for next couple of years. It's transitioning out. During this whole period, we're seeing like a transformation in all these things that I mentioned. It's so obvious, right? You're seeing changes in business, you're seeing changes in banking, and you're seeing changes in government. And when Pluto actually entered Capricorn, like right around the time it was going into Capricorn, that's when Bitcoin was the genesis for Bitcoin happened at that time, which started, cryptocurrency, blockchain technology. And then around that same time, that's when the United States was in the recession and they did all the bank bailouts. But the beginning of it was less obvious. But in the recent years, in the last, I'd say from 2017 onward, or even 2016 onward, this Pluto and Capricorn process really heated up a lot. And then in 2020, Saturn joined Pluto in Capricorn along with Jupiter. We also had eclipses in Capricorn. So all those other energies kind of really anchored the Pluto and Capricorn process, because Pluto is a very, some people don't call it a planet anymore, but it's got a really far orbit. It's got a 248-year orbit, right? And you can't see Pluto with the naked eye. You need a telescope. We only discovered Pluto less than 100 years ago. In the 1930s, they discovered Pluto. So, but when a planet that is visible with the naked eye goes in the sun, especially like something like Saturn, it kind of anchors that energy, right? And then we also had, the eclipse. There's like a bunch of things going on in Capricorn around 2020, even those years before and after, that really like it's like, okay, we're here, But even the year, even if you look at like the last decade, if you look at politics, there's been this rise of anti-establishment politicians, people not trusting government. We've had guys like Ron Paul, who's very popular. You've had Bernie Sanders on the other end of the spectrum. I view him as anti-establishment. He's very popular. You have people like Tulsi Gabbard, who's making a lot of noise. And then, Trump, that's why Trump got in. So that's kind of a reflection of that process.
Does it feel like it's still, and I'll let you jump in here, Ben, does it feel like it's still going to keep ramping up? Like, what are the stars saying as far as like, let's just not make it too far, but like throughout the rest of this year, is it going to be continually like ramped up, or is it like? Well,
okay, what's happening this year is it's the exact perfection of the Pluto return of the United States. Right. So Pluto now, okay, so a lot of people who know a little bit about astrology, they might be familiar with the Saturn return. A lot of people know the Saturn return. When a planet returns, that's where it comes back to where it was when you were born. Pluto, no one ever experiences a Pluto return, because unless there's some kind of crazy longevity master and they live 2.5 centuries, but if that's possible. But so this is the first time we're seeing a country go through its Pluto return since we discovered Pluto. I mean, there was some stuff actually. I read some stuff online from another astrologer. There was some things between 1930s and now that had to do with other countries, but this one is very significant because, see, the last time Pluto was in Capricorn was when the United States became a country. It was when the Constitution and July 4th, 76. Yeah, July 4th, 1776 Pluto was the same spot as it is now. That's the last time it was there, at the end of Capricorn. It's at the tail end of Capricorn. So at that time, so Pluto was already going through like we're experiencing now, like transformation in government structures and all the other things that I mentioned. And so and then all of a sudden you had the United States was birthed, and then you could kind of look at it as the beginning of a cycle of Pluto and Capricorn. So over the following years, other democracies or pseudo democracies were created. They were inspired by the U.S. because at that time it was all like kingdoms and it was very authoritarian. And then so the United States, so it's not just the Pluto return for the United States. You can also, the way I see it, some people might dispute me about it, but the way I see it, I think it's a Pluto return for this type of governance, like democracies, right? Because look what's happening all over the other democratic countries in the last few years. It's look what happened in Canada recently with the Freedom Convoy. Look what's going on in Australia, parts of Europe. And a lot of these countries, their government was inspired by the United States, even though they're not completely the same. But anyways, you know what I'm saying? So
it's very interesting that it's the same. I didn't know it's the same time as, the American Revolution.
This is blowing my mind because a couple things that like tie into this is I did a show not too long ago, Waking Infinity, how an expert took a look at a bunch of empires and said, what is the average life expectancy of an empire? And it's 250 years. And our 250th birthday in the United States would be 2026. And what's interesting about that is so you had that article, if you can bring that up one more time, Gordo, because it talks about 2008 to 2024, I believe it was.
Yeah.
So it's either 2024 or 2026.
24.
Okay, 24. So the interesting thing about that is that also fully aligns, maybe give or take a year, with the fourth turning. So that book that was published in 1997 that says every 80 to 90 years there's this economic and also governing cycle where war and crisis seems to pop out. And the last time, I forget exactly what you said, it was when Pluto was discovered in the 1930s. That was just at the dawn of World War II, the previous crisis.
Yeah. The rise of Hitler.
Yeah, and like that's... There was one other aspect that I think I'm failing to remember here, but just the fact that this is completing its cycle all at the same time. This fourth turning, it said around 2008 there will be an inciting incident, and sure enough, that was the housing bubble. Yeah. And really, I mean, there's a lot more to it than that, but that changed a lot of what BlackRock was allowed to do in buying up affordable housing and investment firms and stuff like that. And that just, leads the way all the way. You said 2016, 2017. That was obviously a very volatile time in half the country's life. Yeah. And then come 2020, something very powerful there as well. And it seems to culminate right around roughly the same time. So I would love to know you just mentioned the Pluto return. Yeah. Is there anything else that you're seeing astrologically that could explain maybe not just what's happening here in the US, anything that might explain some of what's happening over in Ukraine, or is it all kind of colliding, together as kind of global astrology?
It is. Well, there's okay. So as far as what's going on in Ukraine and Russia, I haven't looked at their charts enough. I haven't looked at the specific to them, but the whole thing that's happening with Ukraine and Russia is part of the Pluto and Capricorn process, you know, because look, Pluto rules war, Pluto rules destruction, Pluto rules power, control, and like, you know, who's Russia's biggest enemy? The United States, and the United States is in their Pluto return, and the peak of the Pluto return, like, so technically the US has been in its Pluto return as soon as it entered Capricorn. The whole time it's in Capricorn, it's the Pluto return. So it's been in Pluto return for over a decade already, but this year is the exact return. This is the year that everyone's referring to as the return, because this is when the perfection, when it's exact to the degree. So right around the time when it perfected, that's when things started getting ramped up in the Ukraine. That's when the United States, they were inspired by the Canadian Freedom Convoy, and they started one in the US. That's around the time that in Ottawa in Canada, when they broke up the Freedom Convoy, and they had that, you know, all those police like roughing people up and stuff like that, and then Trudeau stepping into like an authoritarian leader. All that stuff all tied in with the first perfection of the United States, or Pluto return for democracy. So in that way, it's connected. But again, I haven't looked enough at Ukraine and Russia and what's going on with their astrology.
Is Pluto at all connected to the like freedom, just the concept of freedom? You said democracy.
No.
Okay.
No. But the thing is that. Sorry, I don't know. You want to finish?
No, go for it. I'm just trying to see if there's any threads here.
Well, the thing is that when Pluto was in Capricorn the last time, like, so it was transforming governments, right, you know, 200 plus years ago, and that's what was birthed. It wasn't. They didn't really refer to it as, from my understanding, it still wasn't an established democracy until a couple of decades later. I don't know the whole history of the U.S. You guys probably know more than me, but the fact that the country was birthed and then it became like a democracy, right? And so it was birthed at that time. So it's just there could have been other things. I don't recall right now going on at that time when in 1776, I don't remember, that could have reflected like democracy, but it's not. Pluto doesn't rule democracy. Pluto is this transformation, renewing, rebirth, destruction.
Okay, interesting.
Right? It could
renewing,
war.
Yeah. Well, it seems like it's going to test whatever's existing at that current time. If it's not built to withstand, 100%. Then it's going to need renewal. And that's what we all feel like right now, is like, hey guys, we feel like we built a lot of this, and a lot of it's kind of on shaky ground, and it's being exposed. And Pluto's like the ultimate exposer in a way, it seems like. I don't know.
Well, look what's happening. Like Pluto also rules like secrets, hidden matters coming to the surface. Look in recent years, more people got into conspiracies, more people finding out, like, whether or not you believe it or not, there's this whole movement that believe that, you know, pedophiles are running everything, right? That's all Pluto stuff coming to the surface. And so you know, and especially back in 2020, Jupiter was aligned with Pluto, and that's when, like, you know, just after the pandemic started, that's when there was this huge sort of surge in people learning about conspiracies around that time, when Jupiter was conjunct Pluto. And that's actually similar when Ben put out, I believe, Esoteric Agenda.
That's right.
That's the last
2008.
Yeah, so that's the last time. So Jupiter conjuncts Pluto approximately like maybe every 12 years or so. But so what happened was, around 2008, there was a big, like, around that time, a lot of people were learning about like spirituality, conspiracies, like learning, going deep in their studies and trying to understand the world better, understand themselves. But there's a lot of people getting into conspiracies because, you know, Zeitgeist came out at that time, and that was whenever two planets come together, it's also the beginning of a cycle. Right. So 2008, that was the beginning of the previous Jupiter-Pluto cycle. And whatever happened at that time planted seeds. And then over the years, you start seeing, like, you know, websites like Collective Evolution, who I used to write for, or you start seeing like, you know, all these different platforms, and everyone's sharing all this like spiritual and conspiracy information on social media. But a lot of it has to do with the seeds that were planted around 2008. And now, but the thing is, in 2008, the Jupiter-Pluto conjunction was aligned with the galactic center, and the galactic center has more of a spiritual theme, and Jupiter was in Sagittarius. Jupiter's strong and rules Sagittarius, so it was more positive. It was more like exciting, and people learning about spirituality and new possibilities and new potentials, and there's raising of consciousness. It was pretty obvious. Now this recent Jupiter-Pluto conjunction in 2020. It was more conspiracy orientated, but the problem was it happened in Capricorn, right? And Jupiter is kind of weak in Capricorn, and Capricorn's ruled by Saturn, and Saturn was in Capricorn while it happened. So Saturn was in charge, right? So that's why you saw all the crazy censorship. Right? It's like having Jupiter in Capricorn with Saturn there is kind of like being in the prison cell with the guard watching, so it was a little bit different because it wasn't as expansive as the Jupiter-Pluto conjunction back in 2008.
This is incredible. There's even in the chat, Maria Love Photography says, so true. I feel like around 2010, I started getting even more into spirituality and metaphysics. To me, it's so interesting because I felt that there was this universal pulse. I never called it channeling, but like when I did my films, there's big hazy periods. I sat in front of a computer, never did film before. I'd done music editing, but for 6 months at a time, Esoteric Agenda just came through me. And then I just put it out online. I had no agenda, no plan, no concept of what it could become, and then it went viral, and I didn't even understand virality. It was something was moving me, and that's why I was giving them for free. Not just that, because when Zeitgeist came out and it was free and it was slightly anonymous, I was like, this is how you reach people's hearts. Is you don't instantly say, first give me your email address or first pay this. It's just like, I want to share my art with you. And that definitely is what that time period felt like. It was something was coming through a lot of people at that time, and I just happened to make a film. A lot of people were experiencing it. It was just right place, right time.
Dude, I remember when I watched your film, I saw Zeitgeist before that, and I remember there's certain things about Zeitgeist that I'm like, oh, they could have did a few things better. And then I was even thinking about, but I didn't know how to make a film. I'm like, I should do a film. And then I actually launched a website where I was sharing different, finding different content on YouTube and stuff, and I would just embed it on my site. And then I remember when I saw your video, I was like, wow, a lot of the things that you talked about in that video, or the way you portrayed things, was similar to the way I was thinking. I'm like, wow, I could have. It's almost like I could have done this video. And we were all of us at that time, we were all just channeling, tuning into something, and you happened to put out that video, and it was a very really well done video. And then Kymatica came after that, and I do to this day, like, well, not lately, but for many years after Kymatica came out, I would talk to so many people, and they said that Kymatica was a huge catalyst for their awakening, which came from Esoteric. It came after Esoteric Agenda, but Esoteric Agenda came out during that seeding. The Esoteric Agenda, combined with other content that was out at that time, was part of that seeding. So the Jupiter-Pluto conjunction at that time was aligned with the galactic center. And that only happens, so even though Jupiter-Pluto conjunctions happen every 12 years, they only align with the galactic center every 1,000 years.
Jeez.
Yeah, that'll happen.
Dude, and so Kymatica was born because of Esoteric Agenda, because people were like, dude, I love Esoteric Agenda, but I'd love for you to do a film that's like the last 15 minutes of Esoteric Agenda, because that's where it inspired me, and that made me shit my pants. So I was like, all right. So it was through 2008. It was January of 2009 that I put out Kymatica. So it was literally the last 6 months of 2008 that I was working on Kymatica at that time. And it is interesting that 12 years after that comes 2020. And then I put out Esoteric Agenda 2, and it was taken down within like 7 days, I think. I think you even, you hit me up and you were like, Ben, you put every flag word on there. It was like 5G, coronavirus, conspiracy, all that shit. And it was just funny. I was like, yeah, I guess they are paying attention in a different way now.
Well, what I remember too, I think you asked me, or we were trying to find a time for you to publish it. And then the time that I think the times that I gave you, it just didn't work out. It didn't flow like that. And then the time that it did go up, I remember I checked, right? And it was like a really bad time, but it was probably meant to happen like that. You know what I mean? Because, we're dealing with Jupiter-Pluto conjunction with Saturn there. Right. So, sometimes that's the thing. Sometimes when you try to pick a time to do something with astrology, sometimes the universe won't allow it sometimes. Yeah. Right? Yeah.
That is super interesting. There's this somebody in the chat. Let's see if I can get the name. Anjani Integrative Healing Arts says, I'm curious what Carmen thinks about the upcoming once-in-a-lifetime experience of Neptune-Jupiter conjunction in Pisces on April 12th. How can we best be in alignment with this transit?
Good question. I mean, we're kind of already feeling it a little bit right now because we got Sun was just, there's a lot going on in Pisces and Jupiter's moving towards it. It can manifest in different ways. Like Jupiter, okay. So it's all happening in Pisces. Pisces is the last sign of the zodiac. Pisces is the sign that we associate with spirituality, our connection to spirit, our sort of our unconscious or subconscious. Pisces is the sign that's the least invested in the physical realm. It's completely in the spirit realms. Now, Neptune is associated with Pisces. Neptune is, some people will say it's the ruler of Pisces. I don't use the modern planets as rulers. I use the traditional planets. But Neptune is definitely a representative of Pisces. It is a Piscean energy on its own. So now you have the traditional ruler of Pisces, Jupiter, in Pisces, moving up to Neptune. So it doesn't get any more Piscean. So Jupiter has an expansive energy. So Jupiter and Pisces conjunct Neptune can be very expansive when it comes to just spirituality, people, going inward more. It could even be very creative. Pisces is creativity, imagination. If you want to do, it could be a good time to put out like any kind of Neptune and Pisces rule like videos, video media, things like that for visual media. So it could be a good time to work on those kinds of things. But it can also have an expansive effect in a negative way too, right? So Neptune could be disillusionment. Neptune could be confusion. Oh, here's one. Neptune rules gas and oil, right? So we see the price of oil go up.
Oh shit.
Yeah, Jupiter is expanding the price of oil and gas.
Damn it, Jupiter.
Yeah, what else? There's something else I'm going to say about that. And it could be a time where, it could be, the thing is, it's interesting. We have Jupiter in Pisces, which is really nice, with Neptune, which can go either way. But then we also have a lot of other hard aspects going on at the same time. So it depends what you're engaged in. But I would say like one way to really utilize that energy is to, any kind of spiritual modalities, creative modalities, tap into your imagination more, anything to do with like energy. Neptune and Pisces rules like energy work, energy healing, that kind of thing. So it could be good in that way.
And when is that supposed to occur? In this?
Well, it's already kind of building. It's already kind of there because Jupiter's in the same decan as, or almost in the same. Sorry, it's not in the same decan, but it's in the same sign. But it'll perfect on. Perfect is when it's exact. It'll perfect exactly April 12th. But even
so does that mean like when the energy's at its peak, or what is that?
That's when it's on its peak, like on paper. Okay. But sometimes there could be other things that could trigger that other periods might feel like a peak, but that's when the peak perfection. So April 12th is when it's at its peak, but it'll, even as we get closer to April 12th, it's applying, it's building up, it's getting stronger. And then even the following week, you still kind of feel it a little bit. It's still kind of there the whole time Jupiter's in Pisces, but that's when it's exact. Yeah.
It's interesting. I have, since I did Esoteric Agenda, this date of April 19, 20, and 21, and 22 now, stuck in my mind because I pointed out how many interesting tragedies, especially in the United States, happened around those dates. I won't go through all of them, but Waco, Columbine, Virginia Tech School shooting, I think it was Hitler's birthday, Not that that's in the same category, but there was a couple others, these interesting tragedies that happened in this country around this time. I don't know if that's, I mean, like when I was looking at it during Esoteric Agenda, it was the, was it Saturnalia? I'm now forgetting the names, something that happens right around that time. But there's a festival.
Beltane?
Beltane.
Yeah, Beltane's early in May.
Okay, early May. Then this would be April 20th. And
Okay.
I think it was either that this started the festival,
Okay.
and then it would culminate. And I think there was two names, one for the beginning of the festival, one for the ending of the festival. And early May, yeah, that would be the end of it. But the beginning of it would start somewhere towards the middle to last half of
420?
April.
420.
I would say, I mean, there's the Fly High Festival. There's obviously all the Earth.
Well,
but
420 is when the sun goes from around April 20th. That's when the sun goes from Aries to Taurus. And then also that, and it's interesting, Earth Day is like what, the 22nd, and Taurus rules Earth. If you see like a lot of our holidays or special dates that we celebrate or we observe, there's always like an astrological correlation. Like Halloween is Scorpio season, Earth Day, or look, today's St. Patrick's Day. What do people do on St. Patrick's Day? They get drunk. You know, right. Pisces rules. Oh, speaking of Jupiter and Neptune, like, you got to be careful not to get too intoxicated, because Pisces rules intoxication. It could be alcohol, it could be drugs, it could be psychedelics, it could be in a positive way or a negative way. So St. Patrick's Day is always right at the end of Pisces, and which has to do with, like, you know, alcohol intoxication. One other thing too, sorry, I just want to mention about Jupiter and Neptune. It came to my mind and we forgot about it. The metaverse is very Piscean. Right, because it's so Pisces rules like illusions. Things are not real. Like video games are associated with Pisces, Neptune. Visual media, video, photography, painting, that's all Pisces domain. But the metaverse and this like fake reality, people participating in this not virtual reality, that's totally Pisces Neptune. And Pisces Neptune is also associated with like escapism. So when people engage in those kinds of things, they're escaping the real world and participating in this virtual world, or like NFTs, or people, you know, virtual houses selling for $1 million and stuff like that. And, you know what I mean? That's very Pisces Neptune. I just wanted to mention that, but sorry to.
Interesting. I wonder if Zuckerberg's a Pisces.
What was that?
I wonder if Zuckerberg's a Pisces.
I don't know. I forgot. I think I looked at him before, but I don't know. I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to be.
It's all right.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, in the years to come, and maybe even more than just the years to come, what, you know, I know that when people talk, like, you know, moving into the Aquarian Age, that's a really long cycle, and it's also, you know, for a lot of people, it's hard to wrap their minds around. But is there anything that you would say, as concretely as you can, like, it does seem like we're moving into an era where, like, this old specific paradigm won't seem to work anymore? Because it feels like something bigger than just a nation going through economic woes right now. And I know we talk about a 250-year cycle. That's not a small thing. But if we were to say that, like, looking forward, is there something that I'm an artist, and I, for some reason, have felt that, like, around the time that I was making the films, something was calling me that, like, Ben, art is going to be the way, and speak about art, inspire people to use their voice or their creativity to engage with what's happening, and not just mindlessly consume, but engage with it. And that also seems like a lot of the difference between Web 1 to Web 2 is like, oh, now you can engage with the internet more rather than just consume from it. I'm curious your thoughts on what may help us in this period to come. Would it be, you know, like, are there any energies that we can tap into? And I'm not just talking about like the next year or so. I mean, like, you know, are we entering some kind of like new nexus point for humanity where a different paradigm of consciousness might actually suit us?
Okay, yeah, so that's a loaded question.
I love those loaded questions, by the way.
No, that's good. I think first thing I want to say is that the whole thing with the age of Aquarius is up for debate. I know that's not specifically what you're talking about, but you did mention it, so I wanted. So, like, the astrological ages is based on the precession of, or it's supposed to be based on the precession of the sidereal zodiac. And if you do based on, there's a lot of people debate this. If you do based on the precession of the sidereal zodiac, it's still like another 400 years or something like that. Maybe a bit less than that. But the marker of it, like where does it actually start, is debated. It could be off, maybe it might be 300 years or 450 years or whatever. However, just it's going to feel like we're going into an Aquarian age because we had in late 2020, you might remember a lot of people were talking about it. There was the grand conjunction of Jupiter Saturn in Aquarius. There's a lot of hype online at that time about it. And it was right around the solstice in 2020. And that started a 20-year Aquarian cycle, but it also began a 200-year period where it's more, the emphasis is more on the air element. Right? So air, we just came out of a 200-year Earth period. And over the last, since 1980, we've been kind of 1 foot in air, 1 foot in Earth. So we're going into this air period. Like Jupiter and Saturn, they conjunct every 20 years. But for approximately 200 years, they're going to conjunct in one element until when they transition, there might be some overlap. Like at the end of the 200 years, it might be like 120 year in Earth. Like for example, in 1980, we had the first Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in air. It was in Libra, but then in the year 2000, there was one final one in Earth in Taurus, and then now we had now it's in air, and it's going to be in air for like almost 200 years. So, and if you take a look, like air, Jupiter and Saturn have to do with like geopolitical matters, social matters, like the structures of the world, like how the world is functioning, like what are the what's emphasized more in the world, right? So we came out of the Earth period, and Earth has to do with like natural resources, right? Like the last 200 years, the economy was very based on like, oil and mining and all that stuff was even going on before that, but it became like a big emphasis, and it fueled the
industrial period. Exactly.
Yeah. So now we're going into talking about the fourth industrial revolution. It's more it's technocratic, and that's very air, right? So mental. It's very it's mental, but it's also like everything's digital, online. Like let me give you a cool example. So in early 1980s, that's when the compact disc came out, right? So that's the first time they came out with like digital music, or a platform for digital music. But we were still 1 foot in Earth, so it was a physical disc, right? But it was digital inscribed. It was like digitally done, right? And then and now here we are, 40 years later, and now we got everything on a cloud, which is air, right? So yeah. That's just one example, but around 1980, I think. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I'm just curious. Does it also mean like non-physical air, or is?
Yeah, air is definitely non-physical, and like if you look right now, like the most valued thing right now is data, right? Like everyone's collecting your data. What do you do? All these companies trying to, like they're watching what you're doing. They're using it for targeted advertising. They got other agendas to probably tied into it. So that's just one example, but we're just starting this air period. Like this is still the beginning of it, right? So it's going to feel, and like even like everything being technological and AI and merging, especially the next 20 years, because Aquarius rules like AI and like out of all the air signs, Aquarius is the most technological. So we're going to see more of in these next 20 years. That's one of the 20-year periods. We're going to see this big boost in technological advancement. Like we've already been experiencing it, but we're going to see a huge boost.
Right. I mean, everyone knows it's exponential. It's getting harder and harder to predict in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Does it feel? Well, I'm curious. Does it feel like? I was totally blanking on.
So one thing I want to say, just you mentioned. So another thing too is air. Earth element is more routine, more consistent, Air is one of is like more erratic, the element, right?
Right.
So now we're in a time where things like, if you look at our parents or our grandparents, they grew up in a time where they might have worked the same job their whole life. They had this, like, they had to deal with some changes throughout. Like, things are always changing, but we live in a time now where change is going to be a lot more constant, which is is connected to the air element.
Okay, that's because that was leading to my question is air, the elements aren't inherently evil. They're just describing a kind of description, right? So air, like, how do we use it in a good way? Is kind of where I'm getting at, right? Like, and it's so if air, changes become adaptable.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, exactly. So every sign or element has things that we would perceive as pros and cons, right? Air, especially like right now we're in an Aquarian period. So Aquarius could be all this, technology and AI and some of the stuff that some people like, some people won't like. It's a subjective thing. But the Aquarius is also about community. Aquarius also rules freedom. Like the freedom convoy that happened in Canada, like that was totally a reflection of Aquarius and Jupiter and Pisces, because you saw people of all different cultures. You saw people, they're trying to say it was all white supremacists and Nazi flags, but it was people, you saw white Canadians, you saw First Nations, Indigenous Canadians, you saw, or we'll just say Indigenous, I don't want to call them Canadians. You saw like, a lot of Indian people, Black people, all coming together, uniting for freedom. Unity. So Aquarius is about community. It's about the world. We're all one. Same with Pisces too, but it's about Aquarius has to do with more like the social structures of the world and equality. And, each of us, like every single one of us on Earth, we are our own individual contribution to the whole. And Aquarius is the whole. And Aquarius acknowledges each of our individual original contribution to the whole. Aquarius is about authenticity and originality, but how it participates in the whole.
Interesting. I mean, so many of these things resonate from like just a sort of social perspective of how I see things online is like, what's rising to the top is authenticity in the social sphere. Like basically everything I'm hearing is we can use, because a lot of this is how do we use these understandings to the best of our ability in the collective, on the micro and the macro, and like how do we use technology to help build community in a healthy way? How do we use technology not to distract and divide, but to unite and to educate, right? And it can be used for, as we see, really in a harsh way based on profit or just sapping attention. We see the air sign manipulated and used and exploited by the elites for what they want, but we can use it. I want to use it the opposite way, right? That's what we're all about.
So another thing too, like you hear about like the Great Reset, for example, which totally reflects Pluto and Capricorn, reflects the Grand Conjunction. Everything we're talking about is reflected in the Great Reset. And they talk about like in 2030, you will own nothing, but you will be happy. For a lot of people, that's going to be good. Like people might feel more, even though it's authoritarian, people might feel more free. They might be able, there might be some balance. Like for example, right now, if you are Canadian or American or European, if you go travel to India or one of those countries, your money is worth a lot, and there's like this disparity between what our money is worth and what money is worth in a third world country, and so a lot of those people in third world countries, they can't leave, they're stuck because their money is not worth, like hardly worth anything in another country. So what you might see is like everything kind of equal itself out, and maybe they'll do their global currency or whatever. And there's always pros and cons to everything. It's like, technology, like your iPhone is emitting radiation. It's blue light is affecting your eyes, but because of this technology, so many people people learn a lot. A lot of people have woken up to what's going on. A lot of people have been exposed to like spiritual subjects, or even like, we're talking about Ben's documentaries back in, over 10 years ago. That's all because of the internet, right? So there's pros and cons to everything. So even if they do their Great Reset and they do all that stuff, there can be pros and cons. It just depends on how you're perceiving it and how you are co-creating with it. But I think we're going to see more, I think we need to think more community. For sure. Especially, Another thing too, so Ben's question, we didn't even fully answer. Because Ben was looking at very long-term stuff, right? I'm looking at even 200 years, which is, I think Ben was looking more long term. there might be, this is the thing, with Western astrology, we mainly are observing like the planets and shorter cycles. Like we might observe, like, you know, like I said, the Jupiter Pluto conjunction, the galactic center, that happens every 1,000 years, and you know, we observe, we can see things like that with Western astrology. But then there's larger cycles, like for example what the Mayans were looking at. Right. And then there's the they say like every 26,000 years you go through the photon band. This is all like New Age literature, right? Which a lot of it to me nowadays is a question mark. Like, I don't know, you know, I practice a lot more discernment nowadays, so I don't know for sure what's true or what's not, but there is a lot of talk, and there is a lot of, you know, ancient texts and ancient knowledge where they talk about longer term cycles and the golden age. We're going into the golden age.
We're very short-sighted now. I mean, our entire system, especially in the West, it's all about short-sighted every quarter, you know, and you look at like somewhere just culturally like China, they think 100, 1,000 years ahead. And for sure, and in the ancient past, they looked so much more long term. And I don't know if they looked at so much of death as just like only this life for a lot of them. Maybe they saw like, well, I'm going to be here for a long time, I mean, on this body. But so do you think then, well, go ahead, Ben, if you have a question. But
well, I was just going to say, what's interesting about comparing ourselves to peoples of the past is the astrology that we pick up on from the, let's say, the Mayan calendar, the sunstone calendar. That wasn't something that average people were sitting around talking about, likely. You know, it was the Jaguar priests. And, you know, it's an interesting time now where I almost see it as necessary for a lot of this stuff that's being revealed to be revealed. Like you know, you mentioned like whether or not it has, we know this stuff exists, but whether it or not pedophiles are actually in a you know, control place, or the Great Reset is just an idea that some people don't like but they mean well. It doesn't matter what it is. It seems like this is the necessary impetus for average people to decide, no, I'm no average person anymore. I'm going to engage. Like, you know, this grassroots uprising, but it's informational. The way uprisings would happen in the past was they would have to have pitchforks and fire, and they would have to go bloody you up. And now it really does seem like it's informational. It's air. It's like it's the narrative battle. Like, you know, wars of today are more about propaganda than anything. And not just propaganda, but like narrative, and like, you know, how do you make sure you tell this story so the narrative lands correct with people. And I think, I don't know, this is just something that I'm feeling, that there is a purpose to all this. Perhaps what we're seeing is that these are the necessary steps for average people to decide to engage, because otherwise then we're just deciding to have you know, some kind of top-down parental control, which does make us feel safe. You know, boundaries make children feel safe. Like swaddling a child and keeping their arms from being able to move actually adds a layer of feeling of primal comfort. And it almost seems like there's something bringing us out of that comfort into our own, like, no, I don't have to wait for somebody else to save me. Perhaps it is we, and the time is now. It feels like that's what's coming up for me.
Yeah, I feel like we're growing up. I mean, we've been coddled in a lot of ways the past 20 years. Like, not to say that, like, you know, but it just seems like, I don't mean this like from socioeconomics perspective. I mean more from a consciousness perspective. It seems like we're entering a new stage where we're evolving and maturing, and it's just like kids they have teenage years. You have angst. It's certain people are really angsty, and certain people are like, look, man, I'm accepting that I'm growing armpit hair and becoming an adult, or, you know, getting hormones. And just, it seems like, I'm totally with you though, that this is a period where it's a period of growth, but growth is uncomfortable. You know, it's one of the most awkward, uncomfortable stages for all of, you know, for every human, you know. So but does that correspond to what you're seeing at all in the stars, Carmen? Or...
Well, like the way I see it, like I said, it's the way I see astrology doesn't factor in the really like long-term, like thousands of years cycles. Right. However, like I was saying, in there's that Jupiter-Pluto conjunction aligned with the galactic center, which happens every 1,000 years. And that correlated with this huge, like, expansive and a huge shift in the collective consciousness, but not everybody. everyone's got their own version of
Right.
reality, but
We
but for
free will.
certain people, yeah, but for certain people, they're like what was seeded at, 12 years ago or whatever it was, 13, 14 years ago. That is a long-term energy. And the way I see it is that even though there's certain long-term cycles that I can't see, and I know that the Mayans were observing and other cultures were observing, when I look at like the last 15 years, I remember when I got into consciousness and spirituality and health food, I remember 15 years ago, if I wanted to go to do like go to an organic grocery store, I had to drive far. Like it wasn't a lot. Right now, they're everywhere here. Look at so many people are into yoga, so many people are into meditation, breath work. There's been this so there's a reason why there's been this expansive energy in when it comes to spirituality, personal development, health, organic food in the last 15 years, right? So I think it's contributing to where this is where, even though like right now it seems like we're in a crazy shitstorm. We got COVID, we got maybe possibly World War III coming, we got like the world changing, they might take your property away, there's all these things going on in our heads, and a lot of it can be perceived as negative, but at the same time we need to look at the fact that there's a spiritual reason why in the last 15 years, there's been this huge shift in consciousness, not with everybody, but with a large chunk of the population. And so that gives me hope. And I remember, December 21st, 2012, when I was hanging out with Ben, I remember being there, and I know that date is disputed, which is a whole other topic, like whether or not that's the actual date. But just being there and all the intent that was there at that time, it was a very special moment. Like there's something going on. It's hard to exactly pinpoint, like, when is there a golden age? When does the golden age exactly start? It's kind of like when I was talking about the age of Aquarius, right? And the thing is too, you gotta discern, a lot of the new age fluff that's out there too, because a lot of garbage, like new age stuff.
Well, it's very malleable, I'm sure.
Yeah.
I'm sure it's very malleable. I mean, it's constantly moving, changing probabilities depending on not only the stars, but so many variables and what we do and how we affect, the things. And I'm right there with you. I think it's something that I kind of like to think about is astrology. To me, how I'm looking at it more and more now is similar to how I kind of look at it if I approach something, for instance, like surfing and Mother Nature, where I think a lot of times we look at things we anthropomorphize it. So we say, oh, through the eyes of a human being. But the universe, the stars, aren't looking at things through necessarily the eyes of a human being, And so Mother Nature, for instance, when you're riding, a wave, if you don't understand all the elements of various things, the wave's not going to care about your feelings. It's not going to care about, if you're not prepared and you don't time it well, and if you don't have the skills to approach it the right way. And it can be very humbling if you don't do it right, And I feel like it's the same with, what's occurring right now. It's not going to necessarily care about our feelings per se. This is just occurring because it's part of nature. And you either learn how to ride with it and ride the wave, or it could really, knock you on your ass. I mean, is that how you kind of look at it in the stars? Do we tend to sort of place our perspective on it? And does that line up at all with how you view it, Carmen?
Yeah, it does. It does, and it does. Like, I don't know, man. I'm in a weird. I'm in a weird place right now because I don't want to, I'm not a big. I'm getting fed up with technology, right? And we're going into a period where it's going to be more. Technology is going to be at more foundational in our reality, and for me, there's a part of me that's holding on to the old a little bit, but that's from I was talking about the Earth air period. But then there's the long term, like we were talking about, the long term energies, the long term cycles that we can't totally perceive. I'm more hopeful about that, but I don't want to put a microchip in my body, or I don't want to have to carry my phone everywhere all the time, or you know what I mean. And I don't want to live in a smart city. I want to live in the country and live off the land. You know what I mean? So it's I don't want to eat lab grown meat, right? So I kind of have a like I said, there's part of me that's optimistic and looking at the big picture and looking at how everything has unfolded from when it comes to the collective shift in consciousness, and then there's another part of me that's like, oh man, the world's going to shit.
Well, I think we need. I mean, I'm a Cancer, so I'm a water sign, if that gives you any reading.
Okay.
But like, I think we need Earth in time. We need Earth type energy, especially now, so that we don't let the air run away with it, right? We need the Earth to help ground us so we don't float the fuck away, you know?
Absolutely.
And so the Earth is helping us ground it and saying, hey guys, like, let's not float away. I understand air is important to breathe and, you know, all the properties, but Earth is very much helping us stay grounded while everything's becoming so digital, you know, airy, so to speak. But I can also, it makes sense that you would have a lot of not resentment, but resistance maybe, or it'd be harder to accept air energy if it's like, this is too, does it feel kind of opposite to your nature? Or how does somebody who's very earthly like you integrate air energy in a healthy way?
Good question.
That's a very good question. Well, I mean, don't let it own you. Like, you use it as a tool for whatever you're doing, whatever your goals are. Don't let it own you. Don't, like, for example, like this week, my phone completely like got messed up. I had to get a new phone yesterday. My laptop's like causing problems, and I got to do all these like. My old iPhone doesn't plug into my computer, so I can't back it up to my new iPhone, and I got to reinstall everything manually and all this stuff, and I'm just like fed up with it, right? And yeah, and it's so you know, but not using it. I don't know. I guess I don't really have a long answer for that. It's just don't let it own you. Like, use it as a tool, work with it, but don't have a healthy relationship. Like, don't, you know, like, even you look at, like, you know, the metaverse and all this stuff, like. You know, you gotta have, you just gotta have a healthy relationship with it. That's the only real answer I can say. And then again, like I said, like, this is a time where we need to start thinking more about community and really thinking about, like, what, you know, what do I have to offer to the community? What do you have to offer to the community? How can we work together? And even like using things like astrology. Like, astrology got really popular too in the last decade, and using things like astrology to understand each other better. And like, okay, well, your astrology is like this. Well, you're good with this, and you should, you know, like really understanding. I think one of the things that's been missing throughout our lifetime, and especially our parents' generations, is that, especially with the school system and everything, is that we didn't, you know, and this is what makes like Waldorf education different, is that like, we don't acknowledge the fact that everyone's got different gifts, everyone's got different skills, and some people are weak in other things, right? We just think that, oh, everybody should know how to do this, everybody should be good at that, right? And the reality is that everyone's got different gifts and skills and different things that they're good at. Some people are amazing artists, but they have a hard time doing their taxes, and you know what I mean? So I think in the future, one way we can really work with this energy is to really understand, okay, who's good at what, how could they contribute to the whole, and we can use astrology as a tool to help us understand that.
Definitely.
I love that, and I love bringing it back to community. That just seems to keep coming up as the most timeless resource. I had people saying back in the day, something's coming economically. I think it was back in 2011 or 2012, this economist was saying, like, the 2008 thing is going to be dwarfed by something in the coming decade. And it sure is. And people were asking him, like, well, what do we do? Do we get into gold? Do we diversify our portfolio? Do we buy more assets? Blah, blah, blah. Hide, money in shoeboxes under the bed. And they were like, community. Community has been there since the dawn. And it's always been that thing that we have leaned on. It's not impartial. Like, money, it's great. You could have piles of it and you're going hungry and there's no food around. It's like, it's impartial to that. People, there's always at least something that can be done, and if there's nothing that can be done, then at least it's like sympathy. You have sympathy, you have warmth, and like some kind of caring from community. My question that there was one more question in here. Oh yeah. So Jeffrey Cummings, is there a user-friendly app that one could consult if one wanted to engage with astrology a bit more intuitively in their own life? And then he says, or what practices work best if individuals wanted to engage more with this? I would personally say, Jeffrey, contact Carmen and get a baseline for it, And then from there, you can definitely probably understand it a little bit better than an app would be able to give you. But that's just because, like, for me, I love going to a human that can tease out the meaning, and then we can have a conversation. And then, as you can tell with Carmen, he'll be saying something, and then something else will trigger. It's like, oh yeah, did you know, what was it, Pluto and gas, or was it Neptune and gas and oil, or Jupiter, something like that. But like these things come to you when you're talking to a human. But anyway, I'll let you answer that question. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, look, there's all these apps now that could be definitely helpful, useful. When I started learning astrology, I used to go, before like we had smartphones, I used to go on a lot of websites, and they would give you like cookbook interpretations, fragmented interpretations. Like they would say, like, just say you're looking at your forecast, you might get an interpretation for, you know, Saturn's trying your moon right now, and it'll give you a cookbook interpretation for that specific thing. But the problem is when you use apps or software or websites, everything's fragmented. It doesn't put it all together, and that's where an astrologer comes in. But a good thing to do is a good thing to kind of, like, if you want to embody astrology more, integrate it more into your life, even just pay attention to the moon, like the moon phases, like tune into the energy of the new moon, and then the first quarter moon, full moon, last quarter moon, and understanding like how the moon cycle works, like the waxing from the new moon to the full moon, and the waning from the full moon to the new moon, or knowing like, okay, the moon is in this sign for the next couple of days. Like that's a basic way. It does get more complex, but like, for example, every 2.5 days, the moon changes signs, right? So you'll notice that when the moon's in Aries, more people are in a rush, right? You'll notice when the moon's in Taurus, more people are, want to eat tasty foods or get a massage or whatever, or people are moving a little slower or whatever. So that's kind of like a basic thing you can do. And then, but obviously there's a lot of nuance, right? Because the moon could be in Aries and everyone's kind of in a rush, but then it's opposing Saturn, and there's a lot of Saturn can bring a lot of restriction and slow things down too. So there's a lot of nuances. So like what Ben said, when you have an astrologer, they can identify all that stuff. But these are things you can definitely do. And even knowing like the 12 signs of the zodiac, like knowing the energies of each sign, and then paying attention when the moon's in that sign, and then also when it's the month of that sign. But then also looking at people in your life, like, learning, like, let's say you're an air sign, you might find that, this is just a generalization, but you might find that a good chunk of your friends are air and fire signs, which are all more compatible with each other, and learning like, the signs of all your friends. And then once you get a little more advanced, then learn about the moon sign, and then just observe them and integrate that into your consciousness. Like with me, for example, like I'm at a place right now where, I can, let's say I meet someone, let's say I don't know their astrology, I can see qualities that they have where I could be like, okay, if this person has these qualities, then they probably they're a very Plutonian person, so they're probably also like this, right? And that's how Carl Jung, or however you want to pronounce it, astrology helped him understand psychology, even though he studied astrology, but he wasn't using astrology directly in his psychology work. But it helped him understand that, okay, if this person has this quality, which could be represented by a planet, then they're probably going to have these other qualities because it's the same energy. You know what I'm saying? So you can incorporate, as you evolve in your understanding, you can incorporate that kind of thing. Right?
So tonight is the worm moon, right before the equinox. It's the full moon. I don't know, I was reading up, why do they call that?
You said the worm?
Southern Native American tribes named the worm moon after the earthworms casting feces, basically, that emerged as the ground thawed at winter's end. So that's what we're in for tonight, everyone. And it's right before spring equinox. I guess as we're wrapping up, what are your thoughts also on engaging with, like, the equinox is upon us, and there's a worm moon just a couple days beforehand. What would be something you would, if somebody wants to engage, but they're like, I don't know what to do, but I kind of want to engage more with these cycles because I feel a calling to. what would you suggest for somebody who wants to engage more with, okay, a worm moon's coming up, it's right before the equinox, what do I do?
Okay, so firstly, I never call it a worm moon. Astrologers will call it it's a full moon in Virgo.
Okay.
So we got to look at the Virgo side, right? But the thing is, okay, so first of all, we're going into the equinox, and the equinox is we can view it as like the new year, beginning of the new year, beginning of the astrological new year, because that's when right now we're in the last sign of the zodiac, and then the spring equinox in the northern hemisphere is Aries, right? It's the first sign of the zodiac. So, and even, I don't know if you're familiar, like Persians, that's their new year, right on the equinox. They call it Nowruz. Like they celebrate, let's say the equinox is 1:53 p.m. That's when they're like, Happy New Year at that time. I live in an area with a lot of Persians where I live, so I see like all the Nowruz stuff going on. So, and you could, if you want, you could even maybe use the equinox. I don't have enough. I'm not sure 100% if it'll work. Some people like to work with the winter solstice, but you can do your intentions for the whole year if you want. It might help, it might not. It depends on other nuances in the astrology, but you could state out your intentions where you, because that's the beginning of the new year astrologically. And then right now we're at the end of Pisces season, and it's not only is it the end of Pisces season, it's the end of the whole zodiac, right? And the end of Pisces season, it's kind of like, where am I? What am I doing? Like you're confusing. You might feel like you're drowning. It's overwhelmed. Sometimes people can have anxiety at the end of Pisces. It's like right because Pisces is the spirit realm and Aries is like a newborn baby. So it's kind of like we're in between like those archetypes, right? But the full moon in Virgo. Here's one. So a lot of people like to do like cleanses in the springtime, right? And I think following this full moon, even though it's a few days, like this edition of full moon in Virgo is like 3 days before the equinox, or approximately. Sometimes it can be, a little bit, it could be a week and a half before. I think this is a really good, this full moon specifically, because Virgo rules health. Virgo rules the intestines. Virgo rules cleaning, cleansing, those kinds of things. So I think I think just in general, this time of year, when you're coming out of winter, I find like even me in the winter, I eat more heavy foods and things like that. It could be a good time to just, start eating lighter, do some cleansing, do some fasting, and clear up your digest, because Virgo also rules the digestive system, right? And then, and the thing is too, is the full moon is, from the moment of the full moon until the next new moon, the moon is waning, right? So the waning part, the waning 2 weeks of the moon cycle is more, it's connected with release, letting go, right? So that's why it could be good for a cleanse, because you're releasing, you're detoxing. So that's what I recommend for this specific thing. But you can, the thing is that the full moon, whenever it's a full moon, the moon is always in the opposite sign of where the sun is, whatever season it is. Right. So from the full moon to the new moon, it's always a waning energy. And you can use the waning moon as if there's things that you want to release or let go from your life, like intentionally, the waning moon is always best for that kind of thing. And then the new moon to the full moon is the waxing energy. So that's a good energy for putting things in place that you want to grow and expand. And it could be temporary for that moon cycle, or it could be long term. So
makes sense.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
I love that. And definitely there's that balance between knowing when to let stuff go, even though you would like to get more.
Exhale the bullshit.
Yeah. And like a lot of the times I've found myself, when I was learning about using the waxing and the waning of the moon, there were times where I was definitely feeling like, oh man, I wish it was time to call shit in because I want stuff. And it's pretty funny, but it does seem like a time, a really interesting way to get back within your own rhythms, to acknowledge, listen, it's like breathing in and breathing out. The next cycle will come. It's beautiful to at least acknowledge that and put that into practice.
Another thing too is sometimes we don't have to think about it too much. We're just already doing it. You know what I mean? Like
our body knows.
It's already working. Yeah, it's already working through. Like I know it's this time of year. like it's starting to get warmer. Like I feel like, oh, I want to start eating more salads, or I want to clean my Virgo.
I want a lighter beard.
I want to clean my room. I want to cut my hair. Actually, I'm thinking about cutting my hair, right? And so Virgo's rules cleaning, not just your physical body, but spring cleaning, right? And so you naturally feel like that, anyways, this time of year. So
I believe it. Physical intelligence.
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah. Dude, Carmen, this has been brilliant, man. And as I said before, man, I would love to have you back on, especially like as we keep just blazing forward in this world that keeps rapidly transforming. The chat lit up, and I'm sorry, there was a bunch of other questions. You know, one was like, you know, what's the most true, sidereal or tropic or tropical? And I know there's probably like a lot of nuance and stuff that we can get into in this. I tried to keep it to the most efficient and conversational conversation. So apologies for all. Yeah, apologies for any of those questions that I didn't get to. But I wanted to say, you know, who was it that said it over here? It's just like, wow, so refreshing. This is so cool to see an astrologer in here. And it really does. It simply, I'm sure if you spoke without astrology as being the primary topic, you would still be able to speak in these ways that people just feel naturally inside them. But there's something about this science and the heavens. And I'll bring it back to what I was saying, like the oldest megalithic sites, the oldest things that we can see from ancient civilizations were doing exactly what you're doing today. Exactly, you know, just not on a podcast. You know, back then they were sharing it with the priesthoods, and they were sharing it with the, you know, whatever the powers that be. So I love that we're living in a time like today. And I guess I would just say, like, let the audience know how they can get in touch with you. Sure. You know, what you offer, how they can get in touch with you, and anything else that we may have missed.
Sure, yeah. So my main website is carmendiluccio.com. You'll see my name on the YouTube, how to spell it. If you're interested in like my services or anything like that, that's where you'll find all that, where you can schedule an appointment and stuff like that. And then I just recently put out a new website a few weeks ago. It's called astrologydistrict.com. I'm going to, over time, I'm going to be putting more content on there. I just wanted to get it up, but right now I'm not doing as much content as I normally do, but over time I will start pumping out more content. I will develop that site. That's kind of a basic site right now. So, or you could even, if you go on my regular site, carmendiluccio.com, you can even join my mailing list if you want to be up to date with everything I'm doing or any content I'm putting out. And then also on social media, my full name, Carmen Di Luccio, on Instagram, on Facebook, my personal profile. I also have a profile for Astrology District I just put up. I have a YouTube channel, which I haven't really been doing much with it, but I plan on doing some more YouTube stuff in the future. Yeah, and that's pretty much it for now.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful. I really do recommend anyone who's interested, please reach out to Carmen. You can also reach out to me if you want the introduction. But it's something that you can engage with. You know, I often talk about divination cards and stuff like that. And divination cards are, yeah, so you can see it, like, you know, animal cards and stuff like that. There's a lot of people who say, like, I don't believe it predicts your future. And I'm like, yeah, I don't either. I think it's contemplative. It helps you reflect upon yourself. And what's interesting is the deeper you get into any kind of divination, the more you realize that the external world is also self. It really is like what you would call an internal communication. And, you know, you may think, yeah, but you're just making the metaphorical leaps in your head. Why did God give us such a, beautiful ability to be able to link, laterally transfer meaning from either astrology or divination cards into our current temporary whatever's going on in our life? I think it's specifically for this. And I definitely think that's why astrology is the oldest and most time-tested, then, if you will, science known to man. So with that being said, Carmen, I just want to say thank you so much. I'm so happy to know you, dude. Yeah,
me too.
It's been a wild ride, and I hope you make it down to the States here sometime. You know, come down to Tennessee anytime you want, man.
Oh, you're in Tennessee now?
I'm in Nashville, but I mean, I'm traveling nonstop. Cool. I'm probably in Austin almost more than I am in Nashville.
Cool. I'd love to come down there. I probably might have to sneak across the border because I'm not vaccinated, but I would love to come down there, man. Texas. I want to come down to Texas or Tennessee. I've been to Tennessee before, but yeah, man, I'd love to hook up and see you. It's great. You know, I appreciate my relationship with you. I appreciate you having me on the podcast. I appreciate knowing you. Yeah, man, it's awesome. And good to meet you, Gordon, as well. You're super cool. Even though I hardly know you, you're a really cool guy so far. So, yeah.
Beautiful. Well, ladies and gentlemen, this is one of my favorite shows. As I saw in the chats, a lot of people, there's this refreshing aspect to this. In the conversation of what's happening in the world today, we can get bogged down, we can get very anxious, and sometimes we just need clarity. It's not that we don't have the power, it's not that we don't have the intelligence. Sometimes it's just the fog and we need clarity. And I really felt a lot of clarity from what was being talked about today. Additionally to that, it's not just clarity like when you're looking at a screen, you want to see it a little more. It's clarity so you know how to engage with what's happening. And I definitely feel that what we learned today helps us bring in tips and tools to engage with life a little more, play, experiment, see what feedback ripples we get from how to use these tools and tasks in our lives. And I guarantee that underlying communication between self that we don't acknowledge as ourself and self that we do is communicating and beckoning us to wake up. I definitely believe that we are in a beautiful awakening, and awakening oftentimes does not come, you know, without some kind of healing and mourning for what's being lost. So with that being said, I'll leave it at that. I want to thank you all for coming every single Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern. It's such a pleasure to see you all in the chats. And with that being said, please go check out Carmen Di Luccio's website. And with that being said, I'll check you all next time on the Ben Stewart Podcast.